The next hour will inform you on how cybersecurity is one of the most significant threats to our national security, as well as the battle that cybersecurity experts are undergoing every day on your behalf to protect you, your families, and your data. Welcome to Task Force 7 Radio with your host, the President and CEO of Task Force 7 Radio and Task Force 7 Technologies, George Reedus.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 97 of Task Force 7 Radio, the voice of cybersecurity. I'm your host, George Reedus, along with my co-host, the CISO of Siena, Andy Benillo. I want to emphasize that all opinions expressed in the show are my own, I'm my present or past employers. I will never disclose any sensitive intelligence that I've been privileged to as a result of my current employment, and I will never knowingly disclose any classified information related to any security clearances I presently hold or have held in the past with the United States government, and nothing I say during this show should be construed as legal or financial advice. So, before we get started, I want to remind our listeners you can go online to the Cybersecurity Hub and read a recap of tonight's show and get other up-to-date cybersecurity breaking news at their very cool website, www.cshub.com. The Cybersecurity Hub is an online news source for global cybersecurity professionals and business leaders who leverage technology and services to secure their networks. The media professionals of the Cybersecurity Hub are dedicated to providing the latest industry news, thought leadership, and analysis in the cybersecurity space. So again, to check out a recap of tonight's show and get other up-to-date cybersecurity breaking news, go to the Cybersecurity Hub at cshub.com. That's the Cybersecurity Hub at cshub.com. So, my main man, Andy Benillo, kicking it last week with Ed Cabrera, and he's the Chief Cybersecurity Officer over at Trend Micro. He's one of the leading cybersecurity companies in the industry, and they got on the show to talk about the risk and threats and vulnerabilities that cybersecurity professionals are facing today. And the show got a huge response from our audience. It's actually one of our biggest weeks ever on the show, and that just goes to show you how much respect is out there for Ed. And, Ed got into the details on what many people are really interested in, and that's the details about the who, the what, the where, the how, the why, the whole report, right? The whole intelligence brief about threat actor groups and specific threat actor groups. And look, everyday cybersecurity professionals are very interested in this kind of information because it affects their work every day. And the everyday folks out there that are just interested in cybersecurity are really fascinated by these underground cybersecurity groups, or they're not cybersecurity groups, they're cyber organized crime groups, that are attacking our way of life every single day, right? So it's the adversary. So who is the adversary? And that's very interesting to folks, and it should be. So the importance of actionable intelligence in every single intelligence-led program cannot be understated, right? It just can't be understated. I think, Ed also talked about the importance of cybersecurity awareness in every corporate culture, which I think is a lot bigger of a challenge than people seem to think it is. I think it's, I think people are underestimating, how difficult it is to actually shift and move an entire culture in a certain direction. And he also talked about the role of compliance and how that helps to increase an organization's defense and depth security posture. There is a role there, right? And we talk about this a lot. We try to get away from the compliance checkbox, operation and that kind of model and get back into a risk model. We're always talking about risk on this show. But compliance has a role, and we should understand what that role is. And he dove into the cybersecurity talent crisis, too, and the workforce skills gap that the industry is currently facing. Look, which I predict is just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse. That's right. It's going to get worse. I really think it is. And I think we'll dive into that more in an upcoming episode. But that's right, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's going to get a lot worse than it is. And it certainly doesn't seem to be getting any better. And I think I know why. Cabrera wrapped up last week's episode with co-host Andy Benillo by discussing how threat research drives innovation and the creation of disruptive technologies, which is very cool. So the show was totally badass. If you missed it, not to fret, ladies and gentlemen. You can always watch us or catch us on playback. Not watch us yet, but you will soon. Catch us on playback on your favorite playback medium. It's right at the top of your TF7 radio playback library. So don't miss Ed Cabrera, the Chief Cybersecurity Officer of Trend Micro. On last week's episode, that's episode number 96 of Task Force 7 Radio. Well, if you're listening to us live on Voice America right now, or maybe someone just sent you a link to this episode, You might be wondering how you can listen to all the previous Task Force 7 radio episodes on playback. Just go to our new TF7 radio site at www.tf7radio.com and hit the episode tab at the top of the homepage, and you can find all the TF7 radio episodes at your fingertips. You can also search our guest library, which is a most impressive list of some of the most prolific cybersecurity professionals in the world, including Mr. Ed Cabrera, of course. Last week he was on the show. And, of course, we have our news section, as well as you can check out the latest cybersecurity news and just sync up with all the other TF7 radio listeners out there. You can write comments on the news articles. It's just a lot of fun. And we're on at least 11 different playback mediums now. We made it easy for you to find them all. Just hit the subscribe button at the top right of the homepage, and you'll see your entire selection of playback mediums. And most importantly, you can subscribe to our show right from the TF7 radio website, which is really the best way to stay connected to the TF7 family. This way, you will get all the TF7 radio updates right from the site. And as the site gets more robust, you'll get notified about TF7 extras, encore episodes like the one we'll be posting this week. And I can't wait to see who it's going to be, because I haven't even chose that encore episode yet. These encore episodes do really, really well. They're some of the most listened to episodes that we have in TF7 radio. And we throw them out there once a month, just to remind everybody in case you missed it. We put it right at the top of the library, and people love it. So check us out, folks, www.tf7radio.com, to hear any of our episodes at your convenience, 24/7, 365, anytime, anywhere around the globe. And as always, whatever you do, don't forget to subscribe. We love it when you subscribe, folks. We love it. So we got another great show for you tonight. We're going to have the Chief Technology Officer of InQuest, Pedram Amini, on the show with us this evening. And before becoming the CTO at InQuest, Pedram was a director at Avast, and then he was a founder at JumpShot. And JumpShot was huge, right? It was a solution for the identification and removal of deeply entrenched malware that had a successful exit for the company, right? So it was a very good deal for him, very successful entrepreneur and technologist. And we're going to ask him a lot about how he did this and how he got it done, especially in the entrepreneurial space. You know, we just had David Raviv on not too long ago. We were talking a lot about startups in the cybersecurity space. So we're going to get Pedram's take on this, because he's done very well in this area. So before JumpShot, he founded the Zero Day Initiative at Tipping Point, where the intrusion prevention system was invented. Very cool. At Tipping Point, he built and managed the world's largest group of independent researchers in the cybersecurity industry, which is to date the predominant source of all Microsoft vulnerability discoveries, which is something that I learned just this week. So it's a very interesting fact. And he has historically spent much of his time in the shoes of a reverse engineer, developing automation tools and processes. And you know what? We're going to get into the trenches a little bit with him about that tonight, and what reverse engineering really is. You know, what this means to the industry, what it means to your career, how important of a skill set is it for white hats to have, and what kind of people are really best at reverse engineering. So I think these are very, very cool questions to ask someone who is so successful in the space and has so much experience being a white hat in reverse engineering and hacking and everything else. So Pedram was formerly presented and given training courses at Black Hat. I think he just spoke at Black Hat a couple of weeks ago, and numerous other information security conferences globally. He holds a cybersecurity degree from Tulane University, and he's the author of the book, Fuzzing, Brute Force Vulnerability Discovery. So it's time, folks. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show the Chief Technology Officer of InQuest, Pedram Amini. So Pedram, welcome to Task Force 7 Radio.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I want to start off today's show with talking with you about some of the more basic definitions and sort of level setting some of the terminology that we often use in this business. And, you know, whether you're at work or whether you hear it on the news, it's very important to understand exactly what some of the words that we say all the time mean. I mean, you hear these words all the time, like hacking and vulnerabilities and exploits and even risk and operational risk and things like that. And then we'll get into some of the more complicated stuff, and I think in the second and third segments of the show. But I just really want to take advantage of your expertise and having you on the show. Because whether you're a novice in cybersecurity or you work in cybersecurity every day in your career and do this all the time, you know, ad nauseum, 7 days a week, right? Especially if you're in ops. I think it's really good to go over some of this stuff once in a while, because some of these terms, they're often interchangeable, and it can get confusing And we hear them all the time. So it's really good to level set and to understand and follow the conversation properly. So really, you have a lot of experience in reverse engineering and hacking and taking advantage of vulnerabilities. What exactly is a hacker? How would you define a hacker?
Yeah, so everyone's got a little different way of defining this word. But for me, truly, a hacker is just someone who has a tenacious curiosity, someone who can sit down and focus on something to completion, can take a device or a piece of software and, through lateral thinking, make it do something that it wasn't originally designed to do. It's a pretty big definition there, but that to me is what a hacker is.
So it sounds to me like someone's got to have an intellectual curiosity about the way things function and the way they're engineered to really be a hacker.
Yeah, and then you got to get in there, get into the guts of it, whether it's code or hardware, and then find a way to manipulate that system to make it do something neat. And this could be something that's as trivial and clever as, for example, you've seen those talking fish on the wall. You push the button and it starts singing.
Yeah,
I've seen I've seen a guy take that thing and make it into an Alexa, right? So when he calls Alexa, that fish looks up off the wall and takes the command. That's a cool hack.
So how do you think these guys get started in this space? I mean, surely somebody doesn't wake up one day and just say, hey, I think I'm going to be a hacker. I mean, that's the way it does work. I mean, I don't know. I'm certainly not a hacker. So what do you, how do people get started in this space? What happens?
There's a variety of ways. I mean, if you go back to, the late 80s, the 90s, I think most guys kind of got their initial fix in this world by playing around with the phone system. These are your phone freakers, as they were called back in the day. Whether it was collecting manuals that they would take off of an AT&T truck or, just, messing around with the phone system. That was one way that folks kind of got into the space. Today, though, it's really anybody who's got a passion for it and can put in the time can really get into the space. If I'm ever asked by folks, hey, I want to get into that world, or, my kid's got an interest, how do they get started? I tell them it's just passion over time, equals hacking.
So how did you get started in this space? How did you get into hacking? How did it interest you? What happened in your life that said, hey, look, told you, hey, look, this is what I really want to be involved with in my career, and I want to do this every day?
Yeah, I've always found the space interesting, just technology interesting. Even at a super young age, I used to watch BattleBots. I'm talking about 7, 8 years old. I was watching BattleBots with a passion. If I could, drawing back, maybe the first legitimate hack I can think of was I got some uncles in Germany, and I was hanging out with them over the summer. They lived in an apartment complex, and there was this series of garages behind them. And I had, I was 8 or 9 years old. I had taken apart their garage door opener, and I noticed that there was a series of dip switches, these toggleable pins in there. And so I just started playing with them, one by one, playing with the different patterns until I figured out how to map each garage door to the individual pin mapping. And so then I would sit there, hiding behind the curtains. And whenever somebody, one of their neighbors came home, and I'd change those dip switches to match their garage code, and I would screw around with them. As he's trying to leave, I would push the button to open the door again, and keeping them confused in there and laughing behind the curtains.
So I think this is almost embedded in people's personalities as growing up as kids. Most people who are hackers, I think, from what you're saying and from what I've seen in my experience, know that they're interested in this space at a very young age. Somebody doesn't wake up at the age of 35 and say, oh man, I'm interested in hacking. That doesn't happen often, right?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment to make. I mean, there's certainly going to be exceptions to any rule,
right?
But I think that's a fair generalization.
So when you're talking about risk, and we talk about risk all the time on this show, right? And we try to drive that home, that we try to get off the compliance checklist here and get into really mitigating and managing risk. It's important to understand what a vulnerability is, and how do you define a vulnerability in the conversation that we're having. So in your mind, how do you define what a vulnerability is in the cybersecurity space?
Sure. So, a vulnerability already exists, right? It's some logic fault or, some other weakness that exists. And let's talk about software here. So there's some logical opening that it creates an opportunity for someone who can discover that vulnerability to make that software behave in an erratic way. On the low end in terms of risk, maybe they can get something to crash, right? Denial of service. That's going to be a less of a risk exposure. On the on the more severe end, perhaps that vulnerability is exploitable in the fashion that you can actually get that software to now run arbitrary code. So if we're looking at, for example, maybe a web server, and perhaps there's an issue with that web server, receiving a large request. On the low end, maybe we can make that web server crash. On the high risk side, perhaps we can make that web server suddenly run a piece of malware that we've passed over to it.
So on the reverse end of that, I guess, is the exploit. And you just mentioned, creating an exploit to take advantage of the vulnerability. How would you define an exploit and how it works in the risk conversation? Yeah,
so the vulnerability exists, sitting there in the software. It's something that was overlooked, or maybe even just by design. The vulnerability exists. An exploit is then the mechanism that takes advantage of that vulnerability to do something. Whatever that something is will be up to the exploit author. But that's the differentiation between those two words.
So can a vulnerability have several different exploits?
Yeah, for sure. If you give, first of all, the same vulnerability might be discovered by multiple folks, and they might have different approaches for exploiting it. And then, of course, once you have exploited it, your payload is, the final deliverable that you're sending down could be anything, and that's going to be driven by intent.
From a forensic standpoint, is the investigation of the vulnerability itself and the identification of these specific TTPs, is that what leads to eventually identifying who the perpetrators are, right? I mean, is that really important in your mind?
So the discovery, it depends, right? There's when we're talking about vulnerabilities, there's known vulnerabilities. So, they publish CVEs, perhaps it patches out, vendors are aware of it. There's vulnerabilities discovered all the time. And then you've got your undiscovered vulnerabilities or your 0-day vulnerabilities, right? So if we're looking at some kind of forensic investigation where, some actor leveraged a known vulnerability to compromise the system versus some actor leveraged a 0-day vulnerability to compromise that system, those two are completely different in terms of interest level. As far as attribution goes, I'm not sure how far the actual vulnerability itself really plays into it. It could, though. Perhaps some guys are better. Some groups are better at discovering certain kinds of vulnerabilities. And so if you see, for example, a SQL injection vulnerability, there might be some hacking group who's just specialized at discovering those kinds of vulns. And when you're in a forensic investigation, you see that some custom SQL injection vulnerability was discovered. You're like, all right, maybe it's that group, because they're known, they're notorious for going around and finding weaknesses in these kinds of applications.
So, what is reverse engineering? How does this play into a hacker's mindset?
So the engineering process, of course, everybody understands. It's this forward thinking. You've got a design document. You want to build something. Reverse engineering is the reverse process of that. You're taking something that was already engineered and you're breaking it down. So when we're looking at a piece of hardware, perhaps it's, opening it up and getting under the hood and determining, what chips exist, what capabilities it has, really figuring out what can this thing do. On the software front, software reverse engineering, you're taking a look at compiled code. So, a software engineer may write high-level source code. It goes through a compiler, and that produces a binary that is, essentially built on machine code or assembly language. So a reverse engineer will go take a look at that binary and now work it back towards the source code. He doesn't have access to the original source code, but can see the actual machine code that's being executed by the system itself. So reverse engineering is really looking at that low-level software and trying to figure out how does this thing work, and then taking that a step further, how can I find a vulnerability in this piece of software, a vulnerability that can then be exploited.
So what is fuzzing? I hear a lot about fuzzing. What is fuzzing, and how does it play into to this conversation and the common lexicon of risk?
Yes. So, when we're talking about discovering a vulnerability, one way of doing so might be the reverse engineering process. I might sit down with a piece of a Microsoft Windows software, for example, and just meticulously start taking it apart, documenting it for myself, tracing how user inputs might be used and how I might be able to abuse that. It's more of a methodical, slow-moving process. And fuzzing is kind of the opposite of that, right? The idea is, actually think about it this way. Like if you've ever looked at lock picking, there's two ways you can pick. Well, there's multiple ways you can pick a lock, right? But there's two general ways. One is kind of sitting there and meticulously playing with the pins, right? You're trying to move each one of these pins up to the shear line and then get that, that lock mechanism to spin. The other way of doing it is you put in a machine that kind of like jiggles it really fast. Right, and the hope there is that in the jiggling process, it's going to happen to line up. That shear line is just going to happen to be found, and you'll be able to open the lock. So that automated version is like fuzzing, whereas that manual pin by pin process is more like reverse engineering. So with the fuzzer, you might, instead of even bothering looking at the machine code, you might just look at how perhaps two things talk to one another, and then write a fuzzer which will just randomize how that conversation is being had. And then that process perhaps will cause that system to crash. Then you can investigate that crash and determine if it crashed because of some vulnerability.
So when we talk about hackers and we talk about their abilities and what makes them really good at hacking, do they have to be good at either reverse engineering or fuzzing? Do they have to be good at both? And what if they're not good at either one of them? Are they good hackers? What do you think?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of facets, to hacking. There's hardware hackers, phone hackers. Somehow lockpicking has kind of fallen into the whole hacking community as well. These, when it comes to software hacking, I think both of those skill sets are good. Some folks will even run them in parallel. You start a fuzzer while you're doing your reverse engineering, and you kind of switch back and forth between the two different sides, two different approaches. But you don't necessarily have to be good at either to be considered a hacker. At least not my definition.
So it's funny, growing up in high school, when I talk to a lot of my friends from high school and they look back and they say, wow, I can't believe that guy became a cop, and he was always in so much trouble when he was younger, or he was running with the wrong crowd or whatever. I think about the fact that you have two kinds of personalities that are sort of, maturing as they go through school, as they go through college, and then they choose their careers. And when I think about the kids from high school, there's a lot of kids that, hey, look, these kids, they became police officers, tend to be on the tougher side. They're like streetwise and street smart. And sometimes they ran with some really rough kids who made some really poor choices after school, and they went and they actually chose the other side, and they were, criminals. And they got arrested a lot. They got into a lot of trouble, sometimes arrested by, the people that they actually grew up with, right? But at some point, there was a fork in the road. And these kids, as human beings, that had to choose a decision whether they're going to go to the good side or the bad side. Basically, are they going to? But what they had in common was that they were tough. They were street smart. Okay, they were very intelligent when it came to negotiation, picking up on little people's tics. Reading people. They were just very sort of streetwise folks. And they all had that in common, and they all weren't, a lot of them weren't afraid. Like, they just weren't afraid. And they actually, in some respects, liked the excitement of that world. Liked the excitement of being on the street. I can remember walking, the beat on the midnight shift. I used to volunteer to do it for free, and, just to stay after the afternoon shift and work with the guys on the midnight shift, just because I liked being out there, right? Just liked being out there a lot. But obviously, there was a lot of guys I grew up with that, were in trouble. And sort of the guys that we ended up, chasing down a lot. But I feel like in some respects, there's an analogy to be made when it comes to being a hacker, when it comes to being, whether you're a white hat, a black hat, gray. And we'll get into this, into this more in the second segment. But what makes someone decide in your mind and then I think this is an open-ended question. Then I don't think there's any right answer, but it just seems to me at some point they say, "Hey, I'm going to go work for a Fortune 500 company. I'm going to work for a red team. I'm going to work on a pen testing team. I'm going to try to take what excites me and what I like to do every day and put it towards something good and something productive, create jobs, protect critical infrastructure, that kind of, or I'm going to be the guy that says, hey, look, I'm just going to go wreak havoc, right? And sometimes it's not even for the money. Like the money's not even a motivator in a lot of these cases. What are your thoughts on all that? I mean, do you have any specific thoughts when it comes to why they do what they do?
It's a really interesting question. As you were asking, I was kind of thinking about it. I think some of it is kind of out of your hands. It just kind of, it's where you fall in. I'll give you an example. Just looking at my own career, I was probably pretty lucky because I was messing around with systems all the time. For example, when I was in university, I went to Tulane down in New Orleans. I must have hacked the school systems, a half dozen times. And I did it out of, not out of a nefarious intent, but just out of curiosity. It was neat. I was there. It was the biggest network and computer system I had like exposure to. And so I wanted to look around and see what kind of things could be found. Every time I did find something, I went and I reported to the school, and they were very receptive about it. They were very supportive, like, oh, it's really cool. Like, you should meet and talk to this guy. How can we fix this? How can we prevent it from happening again? Consider if that would be received differently. If I would have gone there and been treated with, if they would have assumed that I was being malicious and maybe I would have gotten in trouble, that could have dictated my path. All right. So I think in some cases, depending on how you're received, you might go down one path or the other. Because say, in that same example, I was encouraged, I made more contacts, I kept going down more and more of a white hat path. Had I gotten in trouble, thrown out of school, gotten a record, now suddenly my options are more limited, and it's kind of pushing me down more of a black hat path. You get one felony on your record, for example, for some wire fraud, and good luck getting a job in the industry. Realistically, the only way to monetize your skill set at that point is going to be going down the nefarious path and finding some black market ways of picking up cash. Really interesting.
Definitely a product of the environment, right? Definitely a product of the environment.
I think so. Yeah, for sure. That goes to show, how perhaps we should be handling these kind of situations. If you do have it, even if some kid made a mistake and maybe brought down a system that ended up costing us money, how will we treat that kid? What kind of record we give him is going to really dictate the path that he's going to go down. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think there's an analogy to be made. I mean, obviously, a lot of the people I grew up with that chose to be a police officer, a lot of guys I went to school with, played football with, they're police officers. They didn't do it for the money. You know what I'm saying? They're not out there because they're making millions. They're out there because that's what they like to do, and it's part of who they are. And they just chose the side of good. And I think a lot of people who say, "Oh, I can't believe that guy is a police officer." You should go to bed at night and thank your lucky stars that guy's a police officer out there protecting you, who understands how the streets work, who understands how to operate in a very volatile environment to keep you and your family safe. And the same thing sort of goes, I think, into the mindset of these hackers, right? We got to understand what makes these people tick, because I think it's a real fine line between the path that they choose in life. I mean, we can identify these folks earlier on too and get to them, before they make bad choices. I think that would make a world of difference, because I'm kind of seeing, at least in my experience and the people that we've arrested and, in the Secret Service when we were enforcing, 1030, a lot of these people didn't have someone that they could go to that really understood them. They had intelligence parents. A lot of them come from like blue collar families even, and that no one, their parents didn't understand what they were doing. They didn't understand anything about computers at all, and they had no idea that their son or daughter was a computer genius, right?
No idea how to parent that kid. None, right? They just were like, they're completely outside of the norm, completely foreign to them, no understanding of what that person's going through, how they think, right? Like complete oddity to them, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think if we can identify these, people early on, maybe we can make a difference. Okay, folks, it's time. We got to transition to a commercial break. It's time to go to a break here, but stick with us. We're going to really enjoy the conversation that we got coming up, because we're going to get into some really more, a little bit more technical, a little bit more sophisticated things using the terminology that we just went over. But hey, if you're a social media junkie, don't forget to follow TF7 Radio. on your favorite social media platform. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and even Instagram by searching at TF7 Radio, and you'll be immediately connected to the extended TF7 family. For any inquiries regarding sponsoring the show or suggestions for topics or guests, please email me directly at george.reedus@tf7radio.com. That's george.reedus@tf7, that's with the number 7, radio.com. I want to remind our audience that we're building the world's premier cybersecurity professional network, Task Force 7. I'm really excited about this, folks. Tune in over the next several months for more information on this much-needed and much-awaited for network. We're going to solve some problems together, I promise you. Task Force 7, get in the fight. We're going to pause for some quick messages from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with our special guest, the Chief Technology Officer of InQuest, Pedram Amini. So whatever you do, don't go away. You're listening to Task Force 7 Radio, the voice of cybersecurity.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
Account takeover is the fastest growing form of cyber attack. Criminals exploit compromised accounts for financial gain, often causing irreparable and long-term damage to finances and reputation. Many companies think they're protected. They believe using a password manager, multi-factor authentication, behavior-based technology, password rotations, or solutions that scan the deep and dark web is enough. Yet the account takeover problem only continues to get worse. SpyCloud combines human intelligence and automated technology to prevent account takeover for your customers and employees. We recover stolen credentials early in the account takeover life cycle, before the credentials are sold on dark forums. Check your exposure for free at spycloud.com.
As CISOs manage known malware attacks, they also contend with the unknown unknowns. With 24/7 hacker innovation, where do CISOs place their next security investment bet? Find the answer with SINET. With forums and public and private partnership dinners in Toronto, London, Singapore, Tokyo, and across the U.S., SINET is a mission-focused, purpose-driven global community, advancing the next generation of cybersecurity solutions. As an entrepreneurial ecosystem superconnector, SINET brings innovators, top cybersecurity professionals, solution providers, investors, and government executives into a collaborative alliance. Join SINET's global community to empower your organization and the industry to defeat hackers with cybersecurity's next generation of innovation. Learn more at security-innovation.org or Google SINET, S-I-N-E-T.
Email is having an identity crisis. It's just too easy for attackers to spoof trusted brands or even the government. That's why over 80% of email attacks are based on fake identities. The solution is to stop the fakes before they get to the inbox. That's why enterprises use ValleyMail. It's a trusted identity-based email security solution. Find out if your domain can be spoofed and request a complete free phishing analysis at valleymail.com.
You're listening to Task Force 7 Radio with George Reedus. If you'd like to find out more about our program, please visit the website at taskforce7radio.com. Again, that's taskforce7 with the number 7, radio.com. Now, back to this week's show. Here again is your host, George Reedus.
Welcome back to Task Force 7 Radio, the voice of cybersecurity. We're back with our special guest, the Chief Technology Officer of InQuest, Pedram Amini. So, Pedram, in the first episode or the first segment, we were talking about different definitions and that we commonly use when we're speaking in a common lexicon of risk. People can understand the conversation that we're having. And like I said, it didn't matter whether you're a novice in cybersecurity, whether you do this every day. It's sort of important just to sort of level set every day to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, right? So now that we have some of that sort of groundwork in place, and we have that, we're level setting for the conversation we're about to have, I want to talk a little bit about the vulnerability and exploit markets, the black hats, the white hats. And I mentioned this before in the previous segment. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what's your perception of these different markets?
Yeah, sure. So just to give you guys some background, the markets have existed for as long as vulnerabilities and exploits have been around, right? In the majority of the case, though, people were trading them. So, some groups would find vulnerabilities, write exploits, other groups would do the same, and then they would just kind of trade between them. At some point, folks started actually buying and selling, so trading these things for actual cash. And, back in 2002, a company called iDefense out of the DC area had hired me, and we had launched this thing called the Vulnerability Contributor Program, the VCP. And it was really the first above ground, kind of just open, publicly advertised marketplace. We went out there and we said, look, anybody in the world, if you find a vulnerability and you report it to us, we will pay you. We'll verify that thing is actually what you say it is. And then we will pay you for that information, for the rights to that vulnerability. And then now we own it. We own the rights. And then we will go contact the vendor. And of course, it was also beneficial for our customers who we can give early notice to. So that was really one of the first markets, kind of open markets of this kind. And since then, there's been many other ones. I was involved in the creation of the Zero Day Initiative, which is another market similar to that. And at this point, it's just been commoditized. You've got companies like BugCrowd and HackerOne,
right,
where you got a vendor can go to BugCrowd and say, look, I want to tap into the global researcher base. I want them to put their eyes on my product, to find flaws in it. Can you help me do that? And that's exactly what they're geared to do.
It's interesting. So we did a whole episode on the situation over at Uber that happened with some of their programs, allowing people to find vulnerabilities in their systems. And I mean, we did a whole bunch of different shows on this type of stuff. And I think these are some of the most popular shows that we've had because people really are interested in this kind of conversation. There's some, I would say still, even today, there's some problems with the process of allowing people to do this for companies, don't you think? I mean, it doesn't always go down so smooth, does it?
True. And a lot of it is a perception problem, right? Like I remember when we first started the Vulnerability Contributor Program, there was a lot of naysaying. People thought that we were empowering black hat hackers. You guys are causing grief in the world. One of the problems that they neglect to understand is that those vulnerabilities already exist. It's not like we're paying people to write malware, which, you can write malware all day long. Where there's infinite pieces of malware that I can write. The vulnerabilities, it's almost like mining for some kind of ore, right? It's there inside. You've just got to go find it. But there's a limited number of these things. Like there's not an unlimited number of vulnerabilities. So what we're essentially doing is paying people to do that mining, to unearth these vulnerabilities in a responsible fashion. Because the sooner you know about it, the sooner you can fix it, the better that posture of that software becomes.
I think the key phrase here is in a responsible fashion, right? Because in some instances where the problems have existed, some of these people who found these vulnerabilities have actually had access to and even extracted in some sense, in some cases, PII and IP from the company, and that becomes a problem, right? Because then, do notification, and this is a legal issue, and I don't know, this is not really a question for you, but the problem comes is, does notification to customers actually have to happen after that, even though this person's doing this as part of this program? Because technically, they're not, they don't have access. They're not supposed to have access to this information. They don't have authorized access to that PII or IP. And I don't know. I think there's a whole lot of issues that haven't been resolved yet. But these programs are definitely, I think, very beneficial to companies when they're used the right way.
Highlighting the process issue and gap, but I think to some extent it starts with the perception and, like Pedram's saying, the perspective of each side, and almost trusting the motivation of the person who's finding the vulnerability and disclosing it. Right. And that's really, it comes down to communication problem
of the entire population, right? Because they put it out there. They don't say, okay, you 10 guys, they just put out a program. Okay, if you come to us and you tell us we got those vulnerabilities and we can patch it, then we'll give you a certain amount of money, and depending on, A, B, and C, right? But so you don't know who these people are before they find the vulnerability, right? That's the problem. No?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So two things to throw out there, right? One of the things is we're talking about when we're talking about discovering a vulnerability that's going to involve the release of PII, you're looking at attacking a service there, right? Like Uber, for example, has some software they're running on a platform, and if they're actually allowing people to hack their production servers, you're talking to a service that is connected to real data. So with both the VCP and the ZDI, we didn't allow that kind of thing. So we were not buying vulnerabilities in services. We're buying vulnerabilities in software. So you would have to go download that software, set it up in a lab, kind of tear it apart there. And it's its own little ecosystem. There is no feasibility for that to cause any kind of like PII issues, right? You're not attacking something that's in production. Now, for companies like Uber that want to get guys hacking on their services, what they really should be doing is spinning up a secondary copy with test data. That way, even if there is a successful hack, you're going to get fake customer information, not real customer information. But taking that even further, though, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that one of these hackers are able to get access to that data. I mean, that vulnerability is there. It's exposed to the public. If not then somebody else. Maybe some nation state will go and find that vulnerability, exploit that vulnerability, take all the data, and not even tell anybody about it. So, as far as I'm concerned, even in the case where a hacker is seeing things they really shouldn't be seeing, better them in that environment with that intent than somebody else who's just going to take it and dump it, or who knows what else.
So what was it like? Go ahead, Andy. You got something?
Yeah, I had a quick question, a little follow-up. So Pedram, I liked how you mentioned she, right? And we've talked a lot about, workforce diversity and highlighting, successful women in cyber and in IT. From your perspective, what can we do better to attract more women into the hacking community?
Yeah, I mean, so we could certainly start at a younger age, kind of expose. So look, I'm about to be a father of a daughter. We've got our first due at the end of September. And so,
congratulations.
Thank you. And my intent is to treat her the same way that I would treat a son. Like, I find hacking neat. And so I'm not going to, if we do get a Barbie doll and it has the capability of being taken apart, like, we'll take that thing apart and, we'll play with it. Like, it's, I think it's important to expose, both sexes equally to all things, whether it's computer hacking or, even combat sports. Like, I'm equal opportunity, with experience. But then, the other thing is, and personally, I've never seen this firsthand, but you see so many stories of it. It's not the most conducive environment to females because there's a lot of jerks out there that make it difficult. It's heavily male dominated now, and there's a lot of jerk behavior, and you see it at conferences. You hear about it at hackathons. That's got to end. And if you see it going on, it's your responsibility as another man to prevent it from happening. The same way that, if I'm walking down the street and I see a woman being attacked, like, I don't care if I know her or don't know her. Like, my innate reaction is going to be to go help out. And so I think that's got to also apply to the cyber world.
I love it. Stop being a jerk out there, everybody. I love it.
That's right. Stop being a jerk. It comes out to it. We can put it in real simple terms, right? I think what was it like running the iDefense Vulnerability Contributor Program and the Tipping Point 0-Day Initiative? You also ran that as well. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's very interesting stuff.
Yeah. So running the VCP, it was the first of its kind. It was an uphill battle when we first started. First we had to just kind of prove that we were legitimate. Guys were sending us some really crappy vulnerabilities. I remember there was one in a video game system called Abuse that was kind of installed on a bunch of Linux distributions. And, we got this vulnerability report and we're like, this isn't the greatest thing in the world. It's not something that really is valuable to our customer base, but we got to prove to the world that, like, we're legit. You send us information, we're going to go through the process. And it took months of picking up, lackluster vulnerabilities like this before we finally got our first, like, legitimate one that was good, that we're proud of. We're really happy to disclose to the vendor and to share with our customer base. So it was a long uphill battle. We took a lot of shit from a lot of vendors. Microsoft, for example, was very anti VCP when we first started. We had a lot of friction with them. Today, in the past couple of weeks, actually, I saw they had they now have their own bug bounty program, as they call it, and they explicitly call out the iDefense VCP and Tipping Point's ZDI as large contributors and as pioneers in the space. So it took many years. Talking about from 2002, almost 20 years, but they people have turned around. They've come to. Now I ran the VCP from 2002 through 2005. And then I was hired by Tipping Point, moved down to Austin, Texas to start this zero-day initiative. So that was really neat because I got to start from scratch, right? I learned about all the things that made the program good, the things that made the program not so good, and we got to reinvent it from scratch with a more altruistic posture. And that was really exciting because at that point, I had built some clout and rapport. A lot of the researchers, they knew of me. They knew of me from both a researcher as well as from the perspective of a respectful vendor. Like, we're not going to take your stuff, right? If we can't reach an agreement, at the end of the day, you've already shown us your work. So, I need to essentially forget about it. But in the process of telling me about it, if we can't reach a financial agreement, you've already shown me everything. So I had built up the trust, and that was really exciting. I mean, to date, that program is the #1 discoverer of CVEs, of Microsoft vulnerabilities. I mean, if you look at the stats, it's almost 1 major vulnerability released a day, maybe even up to 2 a day now. So, really neat experience.
So I got to ask you this. I mean, with all your experience in this space, what's the hardest platform to hack? What's really when you're like, oh, this is going to be a challenge. Like, this is.
Yeah. Well, it's. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of slack from listeners, on this front. But I'm
worried. No fear on this.
Yeah. I would say the market is going to be a good way of defining this, right? So if it's cheaper to purchase a vulnerability in a platform, that's going to be easier to hack. And if it's more expensive to purchase a vulnerability in a platform, that's going to be more difficult to hack, right? Like, you can just let the market kind of decide, what's easier and what's harder to hack into. So if you're looking at it that way, the most difficult thing to hack is going to be iOS, the operating system that's running on your iPhone and on your iPad. Right? To get a good exploit on that system, you're talking about $1 million. Right? That's what it's going to cost, to buy a capability in that platform outright. Now, ironically, in the past 2 weeks at a Black Hat in Las Vegas, one of the members from Google's security team, Project Zero, they're called, they had found a couple of different remote ways of hacking your iPhone, through SMS, through email sending, right? So no interaction. Like, I can just send you an SMS and, I've popped your iPhone. I'm not on there. So despite the fact that just happened last week, this is still the most difficult platform to hack by far. And it's what I recommend, for example, to my folks. When my father was running a PC, every couple of weeks he's got some malware infection. Switch them over to an iPad. Haven't had a problem since.
So in retrospect, what would be the easiest? And I'm sure I mean, a lot of people won't want to answer this question, but what would be the easiest if you could answer the platform to hack?
Yeah, so on the easy front, well, first of all, let's talk about why is that hard to hack, right? Some of it is because of just hardening at the compiler and the operating system level. A large part of it is the fact that it's a walled garden, right? You can't write a piece of software for the iPhone. You got to write it, send it to Apple. Apple's got to look at it, they review it, they approve it, and then they sign it with their key, and it goes into the Apple ecosystem. So on the, let's say Microsoft Windows ecosystem, I can write a piece of malware and distribute it around the world, no problem. No one's stopping me from doing that. So that's one of the reasons why it's harder to hack that platform. The other thing is attack surface. You talked about risk earlier. Right? When it comes to finding vulnerabilities, the more attack surface you have, the better chance you have of finding a vulnerability. There's just more for you to look at. There's more grounds for you to mine for this ore. So on that front, the easier platforms are going to have a large attack surface, and they're also going to have other facets that are going to be conducive to attack. So, for example, if there's a scripting language that's available, that's going to make my life easier as an attacker because I can manipulate memory and change the conditions so that's easier for me to exploit it. So now we're talking about large attack surface, the ability to do some kind of like programmatic memory manipulation, complex software, right? If you've got code that's parsing 3D models and doing some fancy things on it, that's more difficult to do than just parsing maybe some basic plain text. So when you look at all those things, to me, one of the easiest platforms to hack is going to be, and I think this is the last place where vulnerabilities are going to die, is your things like your Microsoft Office documents, your Adobe PDF documents, right? Your web browser. The web browsers have gotten super fancy with being able to, with sandboxing and privilege separation, to reach the point now where if you want to exploit a browser, you got to chain like 18 exploits together to actually fully pop the system that's running that browser. But that browser has a huge attack surface. I mean, it can play mixed media. It can load Flash and Java. There's JavaScript built into it. There's a plethora of things, and it's constantly changing. Right? That's one of the fastest changing technologies. So fast changing, big attack surface, programmatic memory manipulation. These are going to get you your easiest. So your Office documents, PDF documents. Buying one of those vulnerabilities, you're talking about a couple $1,000s. The browser, that's probably a couple tens of thousands of dollars. And mostly because it's a lot, you got to find a few of them to break out. Any one independent vulnerability on its own, may not be worth that much, but together the full capability, that's going to be, in the tens of thousands of dollar range.
So I find it interesting, the financials of all this, right? And how that works, because it's kind of important when you talk about the organized crime ecosystem and the underground world of cybercrime and how that all works. And obviously the financial ecosystem plays huge into how this sort of propagates across the globe. Let me switch gears for a second. Let's talk about the startup life. I'd like to get your opinion. We just had David Revive on, and he was talking about startups. He's great. The conversation with him was like very, very interesting. I'd like to get your opinion. You obviously have a lot of experience in startups. How's it going? And do you have any advice for people that are thinking about doing a startup in cybersecurity?
Yeah, think real hard about doing it.
It seems to be the consensus of everyone I ask. I mean, this is not for the faint of heart, correct?
Correct. It's a lot of work. I've earned these bags under my eyes, and I don't think they're ever going to go away at this point. It's an uphill battle, but it is exciting. So we talked about earlier about hacking and how it applies to like a large variety of things. I consider the whole startup to be something that's somewhat hacking as well. Right? Like you're building a company. It has processes and workflows. It's got people. It's got an interface to customers, to the public. This whole thing, this whole mechanism from the top level down is something that you're essentially hacking on. Right? Like how people communicate within the company. How we even word something for. You provide something, and then you have to describe it to the general public to get their interest. So all that to me is also somewhat hacking, and I do find it exciting. But it is a tremendous amount of work. And honestly, my first piece of advice to anybody would be get a partner. Like if you're thinking about doing it on your own, the second you get sick or tired, the momentum stops if it's just you. But if you've got a partner, you can kind of support each other, push each other, cover for one another. So at least have one, ideally even more partners when you're starting a startup.
What was it like to launch a product like Jump Shot on Kickstarter?
It was, talking about my last startup here, we had, when I mentioned my dad and his laptop problems, his virus problems. Actually, we built that product with him in mind. The idea was, if I can come home for Christmas, and instead of me spending a half day, tooling through his system to clean up whatever infection combination he had, if I could solve that automatically, I would not just be saving time for myself. Presumably, I'd be saving time for a bunch of other folks who are in my shoes. And so that was the impetus behind that product is, can we build some advanced malware removal tool that could replicate essentially what I was doing as a human. And so that was, I launched that product with a close friend of mine, actually a guy that I met through college. His name's Dave Endler. He's 6 years older than I am, so we never actually went to school at the same time. But every time I would hack the systems and go tell the university personnel about them, they'd be like, oh, you remind us of this guy who just graduated a couple years ago named Dave Endler. And so Dave and I actually ended up working together at iDefense. We did the VCP together. Then we did the ZDI together. And so when HP bought Tipping Point, neither one of us wanted to work at that, such a large firm. So we left and we launched Jump Shot, kind of a garage startup, just the two of us. It was very exciting times. And it reached a point where it took us about 2.5 years of development to get it to a point that we were proud enough that we can actually, try it out on an actual customer's computer. So we thought to ourselves, how best can we get this thing out there? And, Kickstarter was pretty new at the time. At this stage, everyone's heard about it, but, back then it was still pretty new. I want to say we were the first, cybersecurity product to ever get launched on it. At the time, we're in the top 10 biggest tech projects ever launched on it. I'm sure we're nowhere near even the top 100 at this stage, but it was exciting. It was really neat. It gave us, all of a sudden we went from 0 to a couple thousand users. It held our feet to the fire for the first time, with the 2.5 years kind of R&D hidden in a cave. You don't have any real deadlines. You can, outside of the fact that you're running out of money, once you make a promise to a bunch of people, it's really important for you to make that deadline. And so it was a huge value for us. I think the decision to launch that product on Kickstarter really did kickstart our whole endeavor.
So tell me a little bit about posturing for the exit, right? So I'm talking to a lot of companies right now that are saying, hey, look, I'm looking for someone to get someone to acquire my company, and I have to do A, B, and C to get myself in a better position to look more attractive to a potential buyer. How important is that posturing, and when does that really start? I mean, you have this, I think this initiation phase, then you have this growth phase, and then if you want to break it down to 3 different phases, and then you have this sort of posturing for the exit and to get acquired. How important is it? How hard is it?
I mean, I think a lot of it is luck. If you study there's many variables when it comes to startups and acquisition and success. And if you study the large, a large volume, large corpus of data, seemingly the most important thing, and that's something that you really can't control, is timing. Right? The same two teams of equal value with equal great ideas can come out, and one of them is just better timing than the other, and the one that had better timing is the one that's going to be successful. So that's just something that's out of your hands. The way I like to think about it is you're essentially taking a shot. You're lining up your arrow, you're checking the wind, you're thinking about your distance, right? You're doing all these things, and then you're taking a shot. What happens from there? It could be a gust of wind. Maybe the target moved. It's out of your hands. But that's the best thing you can do, is just take the best shot you can. In terms of posturing for acquisition, there's two things there. On the one hand, from day one, you got to be thinking about it in the sense of, even how you do the company agreement, the stock agreement. If you do it one way, your taxation is going to look different than if you do it another way. Obviously, it's a lot better to get hit with a capital gains tax than it is to get hit with a income tax. So the way that you structure the company from day one has to be done in such a fashion that it's aligned, for this kind of future thought. On the flip side, I don't think you can think about the acquisition process, from day one. You got to think about delivering a product that provides value to a customer base and just iterating on that daily. And then the acquisition kind of comes as a natural side effect of that daily grind.
So it's amazing to me how many people don't think about taxes as their primary liability. They think about taxes and they think about, okay, after that, then I have expenses and overhead and things like that. But they don't consider taxes and tax management, and they just ignore it. And it's their biggest expense, right? It's huge. And what you just said really rings true to me, especially as an entrepreneur. I know a lot of these people going around and they're mad. All these people make all this money. They don't pay any taxes. Someone just recently said something to me about the tax code, which I found really interesting. They said, all you have to do is take your money and do what the government wants you to do with your money, and they won't tax you. When you do something that they don't want you to do, they're going to tax you. And it's sort of, when you start thinking about the tax code that way, it really puts things in perspective, right? Because it's like they want you to do certain things, and if you do these things, you won't be taxed. Everyone's all upset about Amazon, I mean, billions and billions of dollars, they don't pay any tax. Well, because they take advantage of the tax laws that are in place. They do what the government wants them to do because the government says, okay, here's the tax code. And in a sense, we're telling you that if you do this, you won't be taxed on, or you get these tax breaks or you'll have these benefits, right? So they do that and then they don't get taxed and then everyone, gets mad, right? But I just, it's
I got to say though, you look at it, like, I do think that the tax codes needs to be changed somewhat for, a company like Amazon should be paying taxes a lot more than they are today. Their executives, their staff, like, they're taking advantage of the freedoms allotted to them by this country. And they're not, in my opinion, they're not paying their fair share back in. On the flip side, also from a startup perspective, the thing about the taxation on that front is you can fail, right? So if I make a startup and I fail, I'm not getting much help back. If I win, I'm going to get, a certain part of my winnings are going to be taken. There's a rake that's going to happen on my winnings, but there's nothing on the flip side. Like, I think there should be, it should be reversed. Like, as a startup, there should be very, very little taxation, right? Because every penny I make, I'm going to spend. We're not sitting or doing any kind of distributions when you're in the startup mode, right? If I had an extra $100,000, that would go to hiring somebody, without a question, without a doubt. Every dollar that we pay in taxes, essentially, it's like molasses. It's slowing us down. It's preventing us from expending that to be, towards some resource that's going to make us grow faster. But then once you make it and you're huge, like your Amazon, then suddenly you've got all these tax shelters that you can hide behind. So I do hope that there will be some reform on that front.
But you can't blame Amazon for taking advantage of the tax code that exists.
Of course not.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just being smart. I mean, it really is. I mean, look, if there's a law out there that says, I can do this and I take advantage of that law and it's legal, then can't blame me. But to your point, maybe it needs to be revised, right?
I mean, not only can you not blame them, it's their fiduciary duty.
Yeah, responsibility.
That's right. That's right. If you don't do that, you're in violation of your fiduciary duty. So, they're doing exactly what they need to be doing. I don't blame them at all. At
the end of the day, what are you up to today? I mean, what are you doing today?
Yeah, so our last, my last startup, Jump Shot, was acquired by a Czech Republic company called Avast. They're one of the biggest AV antivirus vendors in the world. And I spent some time there. Everyone was happy with the deal. We took it to great success for them as well. And then, when the golden handcuffs came off, quote unquote, I was approached by a longtime friend of mine. A buddy of mine actually ran the Pentagon's computer incident response team. And so when I was at Tipping Point, we had picked up a good relationship because we were very curious to see if any one of our zero-day vulnerabilities were being exploited in the wild, right? Because we knew this from personal experience. Sometimes we would get two different researchers, two different sides of the planet. Within the same 6 weeks, they would send us the same vulnerability information. They had different ways of finding it, maybe different ways of exploiting it, but we knew from personal experience that overlap in discoveries was commonplace. We saw, I've seen more zero-day vulnerabilities than probably most people have, but it's not, statistically on the grand scheme of things, it wasn't anywhere near the huge corpus of them. So for me to have seen overlap, I knew that there was going to be overlap elsewhere. And we figured what better place than to go find that kind of exploitation, in one of the biggest, most attacked networks on the planet, right? The Pentagon at the time was the biggest office in the world. I think now it's still the third biggest office in the world. So, my buddy Mike ran that SOC, the Security Operations Center there. And in the process of us working together, towards that project, we just became friends. We really respected one another's work. And when I came out of the Jump Shot acquisition, he approached me. He's like, "Look, we've been building this homegrown tool. It's like that we have access to everything, and while our goal is to provide a secure pipe, we've built this homegrown tool to kind of help cover the gaps. Do you want to take this thing to market with me?" And there's folks who are interested in picking it up, and I immediately jumped on the idea. I'm like, "This is fantastic. I'd love to."
So look, tell us a little bit about who the typical customer of InQuest is. Who uses InQuest, right? And what differentiates InQuest from some of the other tools? And I just want to, we don't do enough, analysis, I think, of some of the products out there. And I just want to get your view, obviously, as a founder and CTO of the company.
Yeah. So, similar, in mindset too with the jump shot product. Like, hey, can I automate what I'm doing? Can I shrink myself down into a USB stick and plug it into a computer and automate that process? It's somewhat of a similar idea behind InQuest as well. Can we take a SOC analyst, someone who, a human being who's got, limited time in his day and can be tired? Can we take that person and shrink them down into a box that's ingesting network traffic and replicate what he or she is doing at scale? That's kind of been the thought process behind it, right? One of the problems that you're going to see just across the board is there's a talent gap, and that's not getting any better. It's only getting worse. There's more data, less people, less skill set. There's just an explosion of work to do, and there's not going to be enough people to do it. There's no solution to that problem other than automation. So that our key thing there is automate the typically mundane tasks that a human being was doing to free up their time and their cognition to do what they do best. So that's kind of the real differentiator, is how deep we go in terms of like the work and analytics that are being performed. We're trying to approach human levels of analytics, so then we can expose data in a way that allows a human to even take that further. Like, look, you guys have carried the baton this far. Let's automate that, and now you can take the baton even further now that you've freed up your time.
All right, Pedram, we got to take another short break to hear from our sponsors. We're running a little long right now, but stay with us, folks. We're going to talk about election hacking and cyber warfare. We're even talking about the dangers of nation states, self-driving cars. It's all coming up on the next segment of this episode, so stay with us. We'll be right back with more from our special guest, the Chief Technology Officer of InQuest, Pedram Amini. You're listening to Task Force 7 Radio, the voice of cybersecurity.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
Account takeover is the fastest growing form of cyber attack. Criminals exploit compromised accounts for financial gain, often causing irreparable and long-term damage to finances and reputation. Many companies think they're protected. They believe using a password manager, multi-factor authentication, behavior-based technology, password rotations, or solutions that scan the deep and dark web is enough. Yet the account takeover problem only continues to get worse. SpyCloud combines human intelligence and automated technology to prevent account takeover for your customers and employees. We recover stolen credentials early in the account takeover life cycle before the credentials are sold on dark forums. Check your exposure for free at spycloud.com.
As CISOs manage known malware attacks, they also contend with the unknown unknowns. With 24/7 hacker innovation, where do CISOs place their next security investment bet? Find the answer with SINET. With forums and public and private partnership dinners in Toronto, London, Singapore, Tokyo, and across the U.S., SINET is a mission-focused, purpose-driven global community, advancing the next generation of cybersecurity solutions. As an entrepreneurial ecosystem super connector, SINET brings innovators, top cybersecurity professionals, solution providers, investors, and government executives into a collaborative alliance. Join SINET's global community to empower your organization and the industry to defeat hackers with cybersecurity's next generation of innovation. Learn more at security-innovation.org or Google SINET, S-I-N-E-T.
Email is having an identity crisis. It's just too easy for attackers to spoof trusted brands or even the government. That's why over 80% of email attacks are based on fake identities. The solution is to stop the fakes before they get to the inbox. That's why enterprises use ValleyMail. It's a trusted identity-based email security solution. Find out if your domain can be spoofed and request a complete free phishing analysis at valleymail.com.
We're not your typical security vendor. In fact, the script for this ad was written by an engineer, not a marketing guru. Because at SOC Prime, we're focused on features that matter to our users. Our threat detection marketplace has over 30,000 cross-platform SIM and EDR rules, Our downloadable Sigma, Yara, and Snort detections can be deployed with just a few clicks and are mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, enabling quicker and more strategic detection. With support from SOC Prime's veteran team and our community of contributors, we bridge the blue team skills gap and cover emerging threats with daily releases of new content. Nearly 3/4 of the threat detection marketplace is free to download. Register for free at tdm.socprime.com with promo code RADIO2019 to receive one free key to unlock premium content. That's tdm.socprime.com. Promo code RADIO2019.
You're listening to Task Force 7 Radio with George Reedus. If you'd like to find out more about our program, please visit the website at taskforce7radio.com. Again, that's taskforce7 with the number 7 radio.com. Now, back to this week's show. Here again is your host, George Reedus.
Welcome back to Task Force 7 Radio, the voice of cybersecurity. We're back with our special guest, the Chief Technology Officer of InQuest, Pedram Amini. So, Pedram, I'm really anxious to get into some of these topics that we're going to talk about right here. We've been talking about election hacking and cyber warfare and a bunch of other stuff on we've had whole episodes on these topics here on Task Force 7 Radio. What are your thoughts on election security these days?
Yeah, there's really two facets to this, right? One is your actual security of the voting devices. Can votes be changed, manipulated, etc.? And then the other aspect, and I think that risk is not as bad as potentially people seem it to be. I mean, you go to like a Black Hat or a DEF CON conference, you see guys are able to hack these election machines. But that's because they have direct access to them. And while it does seem that the Russians were trying that angle as well, I don't think that outcome was as bad as the other facet of the hacking, which is more of the perception, the fake news, the manipulation, the essentially the molding of the zeitgeist to change people's public opinion. That, I think, is a much bigger risk, especially in a day and age where everyone's living in an echo chamber of information, and the machine learning capabilities allow us to do things like deep fakes and just create entire videos of folks talking and arbitrarily getting whatever message you want out there.
So I think this is like a huge topic. I don't know if you think, is it getting enough attention with the political candidates today? I mean, I know everyone's saying, well, the election security benefits the Democrats, and then the other one says, well, election security benefits the Republicans. And so, I mean, look, election security benefits us all. The weaknesses in the security and who's attacking us, I think, is a little irrelevant in terms of what side benefits.
Yeah,
and I think
I totally agree.
So these,
election security protects democracy. I don't care if you're Democratic or Republican. That is the fundamental basis of the whole system, and it's key for it to be secure, not just in the voting machine, but also in the perceptions and the news that's out there. Like, something has to be done for sure, and not enough is being done today, and I don't think enough attention is being put on it either.
On the first episode, the pilot episode of Task Force 7 Radio, I asked Secretary Chertoff if we were in a cyber war. And I asked several people after that, and I like to talk about this topic from time to time because I get a lot of different opinions on how people want to sort of posture that conversation and be very careful in the words that they choose. What are your thoughts on cyber warfare, and are we in a cyber war today?
I would say yes. I think it can certainly escalate further, but I don't think without a doubt that we're not in a cyber war. I mean, I think, decades from now, when we look back at this time, probably the biggest heist ever in the history of time is going to be the information heist. All the data that's been stolen from the U.S. by, foreign nation states, predominantly China. I mean, look at even things like the OPM hack. This is the Office of Personnel Management. Presumably this was the Chinese. They got access to all your cleared personnel. Their PII from them got leaked in that hack. What is the purpose of that? Probably in preparation for future escalated cyber war. You build a database. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I try to bring attention a lot to the the theft of all the stolen information and IP from the United States, specifically from China, that's been used to advance their economy. It's been to advance the technology they use, to advance their military. It's just incredible to me, and it doesn't get enough attention at all. And I don't know why the public doesn't seem to care. They should, because China is literally stealing your children's futures. I mean, stealing everything that our ancestors, the people that came before us, our families, our fathers and mothers and our grandparents and our great-grandparents fought for to get us where we are today. A lot of people gave their lives for this country, and they're just stealing it from us. And it really winds me up, man. I got to tell you, because of my background and some of the information that I've been privileged to over the years in the course of my career, this kind of stuff, I just don't understand why it doesn't get more attention. What do you think we should do to bring this more to the forefront? I know it has a lot to do with the trade talks too. It comes up in the trade talks, and I appreciate the fact that our government's bringing this out when it comes to these trade negotiations with China, and then that we're playing the hardball with them, because we need to. Something needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, the people care what they're told to care about, right? It needs more coverage. It needs more discussion, more dialogue, like we're having here. I mean, you don't have to. And in terms of like proof, it's so blatant. I mean, look at their latest fighter jet. It looks suspiciously like our F-35.
Yeah. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out, right?
Yeah,
you look at the pictures, right?
Yeah, you don't need to be a Lockheed engineer to see that was clearly, stolen IP. Now, jokes on them, as that I guess that plane didn't turn out as well as we wanted to. Seems to be a lot of complaints about it. But in the same way that we talked about the Amazon taxes and how it's a fiduciary duty for them to take advantage of the tax laws, the door is open. It would be silly for them not to take advantage of it. So it's not about, I don't think we can ask them to stop. At the end of the day, we have to change our systems to make it so that it's not possible.
So how do you rate the various nation states out there? First from nation state capability in cybersecurity, and then as an adversary to the United States, considering their motives and what they want. Who's the most dangerous to the United States? And then those two different lists.
Well, it's obviously this is all speculation because, at the end of the day, what does anybody know? Specifically, what would I know? But I would say that number one by far still is the U.S. You look at what I consider to be probably the most impressive piece of code ever written. Look at like the Stuxnet virus. Yeah. That's at this point it's pretty much common knowledge. We wrote that with the intent of slowing down the Iranian nuclear program, and with great success. I mean, that thing is just a work of art. It chains together a number of zero-day vulnerabilities. It's able to jump air-gap networks. I mean, it's got rootkits for programmable logic controllers. It really is just it's a piece of art. But then second, to us, and I don't know how much longer they're going to be second for, is China. Part of it is because they've got a bigger talent pool to draw from. Just look at the Olympics, for example, right? Like they've very quickly caught up because when you have a large population, you have a much higher chance, just statistically, of finding someone who's going to be a great pole vaulter or a great computer hacker. So I see them closing the gap very quickly.
Where's AI fit into this battle? We've talked about it a little bit on the show. I'd love to get your take on the arms race between AI, between nations, and how does that factor in?
Yeah, I mean, look, if the ML and AI today is not general AI. I mean, there's certainly a race to get to that point. It's definitely going to provide a huge advantage to whatever nation controls or invents or really births that technology. In that regard, I think we still have some edge. A lot of the guys in Silicon Valley, you look at the guys behind Google, they believe in this thing called the singularity, the birth of general AI, and how within a second, essentially the difference of intelligence between you and your dog is going to be the difference of intelligence between us and this new, arguably conscious being that we're spinning off. So it certainly is a big race, I would say, more important than any other race that we've had in the past.
So how about these self-driving cars? What do you think about them? I mean, is this going to be more dangerous than it really appears? I mean, I know everyone's sort of excited about this and say, oh, a car drives itself around. I mean, who's going to get in a car and a Lyft or an Uber with no driver in it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not doing that anytime soon.
That's because you're old school.
I am old school. I mean, as soon as we started talking, I got to tell you something. As soon as you started talking about the code that I started, we thought about Lufthansa. We were talking about Lufthansa, the nuclear facility. I started thinking about the Lufthansa heist.
Lufthansa heist.
I am old school, right? I don't show my age here right now, but I mean, what do you think?
I mean, look, I think it's inevitable. And there's going to be some growing pains, but I mean, fast forward, like whatever, pick your time frame. Was it 50, 100 years? Like, this is the future. We're not going to be the same way that folks look at someone who's smoking a cigarette nowadays and like, oh, I can't believe it's a cigarette smoker. You're going to look at someone that's driving their own car and be like, oh, look at this jerk. How dare he, drive his own car? It's so much safer for there to be, to hand it over to the automation. I mean, just think about it from the perspective of a singular machine or a singular car. It's not that. It's a fleet. They're going to be speaking to one another. They're going to be, when two cars are self-driving and one's behind the other, if the one in front has, worn down brake pads, it can send that information down to the car behind it, and they can increase their driving distance from one another. If there's a pothole on the road and one car hits it, it can tell all the other cars about it. If there's a slippery condition, right? You have to think about it as it becoming a hive mind. There's a single driving being that's just moving these pods around. I mean, I certainly look forward to that happening. And think about how it's going to change, where we live, how we get around, even the shape of the car. If you and I can get in a car and face one another and just have a conversation or take a nap, and then 6 hours later we appear somewhere completely on the other side of the country, I mean, that's valuable for us for just getting around.
Man, for me, I think of
my car would have to be a bowling ball.
Oh man, Pedram, look, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I can't wait to have you back. And like we were talking about on the break, let's get together soon. There's a lot to talk about. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, folks, it's time to go. But before we do, I want to remind our listeners to visit the Cybersecurity Hub to read a recap of tonight's show and get other up-to-date cybersecurity breaking news at www.cshub.com. That's the Cybersecurity Hub at cshub.com. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Task Force 7 Radio, the voice of cybersecurity. Stay frosty.